A UAP was just captured in the skies over New Jersey, looking to have warped from one position to the other in an instant. Just weeks before, a mysterious object readjusted the clock in a family's car. Strange lights were also seen over Queens and Georgia, all in the past month. A strange UFO sighting was captured over New Jersey recently. In a 13-second clip shot near Atlantic City on a Sunday night back in December, a strange white light blinks in the sky before suddenly vanishing. Family members who were watching the light in the sky were completely baffled by what they were looking at. The thing just kind of hovers in the sky, slightly flickering before it looks like it disappears. Turns out that's not exactly the case. A man named Tim Janicki, who received the footage from a friend, posted it online with the heading reading, "I don't trust random videos I see on X, but this is 100% real." So this video has been getting shared around quite a bit. One commenter pointed out, "You can see it didn't just disappear, but it took off with incredible speed. There's a small flash of light to the left as it leaves. Humans can't produce the energy required to go that fast, especially from standstill." And that's true. If you look closely, you do see this really quick blip of light appear in the upper left of the screen right after the strange orb of light looks like it vanishes. Other people commented similar things, like one person saying, "No flight system we have right now can go from stationary to warp drive in an instant. These flight characteristics are well beyond light years ahead of us." Now, this is just one incident in a long list of strange sightings in the sky over New Jersey, which led the FAA to briefly limit drone flights in some areas. The FBI and other federal agencies have been looking into a bunch of the reports apparently, and they claim that so far they haven't found anything pointing to a national security threat. Again, so they say. This footage here was posted to Reddit by user YogurtClosetFlat5701 just a couple weeks ago with the caption, "This just happened above Brookville Boulevard, Snake Road in Queens, New York, right next to JFK Airport. We looked up and there were 4 orange orbs in formation in what is supposed to be a no-fly zone. They then started to disappear. Did anybody else in the area witness this?" End of post. And that's a good question. Any New Yorkers in the comments see this as well? Let us know down in the comments here. There are some interesting comments from other witnesses on the post though. One user, Zora Octavia, wrote, "Lived here for 14 years with planes flying by all day, every day. They fly so low it feels like you can almost touch them. I know what they look like when they come into land and take off. I have never seen anything like this. Ever." And that's not the only strange orange orb that's been spotted in the sky recently. On December 26th, a Redditor by the name of HellFollowed84 posted this footage. The video was shot in central Georgia. A father had gone to take out the trash when he spotted the strange orb in the sky. He noticed something, quote, "bright and orange overhead through the pines." He pointed it out to his son and they both just stared at it for several minutes before deciding to film it. The father shared the video on Reddit. In the clip we see this glowing orange orb gliding across the sky, weaving between the tops of pine trees. At one point, the orb looks like it dims and then vanishes entirely. As HellFollowed84 wrote, "When I first observed it, the light was huge, but it was way off, like half a mile. As it got closer, it seemed to dim but stayed the same luminous lighting. As I walked further to capture it, I thought, what if it was trying to evade me?" A bunch of Redditors wondered if it could be a plane, but the user didn't think so, saying it made no sound, unlike the planes that frequently fly over his home. And we're back to New Jersey with another set of strange lights in the sky captured on camera recently. A YouTuber named CJ Faison recently posted footage showing what he believes are drones flying in, quote, "deliberate formations" off the coast of New Jersey over the Atlantic Ocean. He took a boat 26 miles out from the Pine Barrens to get the footage using a night vision camera. In the video, he'd gone out to get footage of the mysterious drones that people have been spotting in the skies over the last couple months. He did manage to capture a bunch of these blinking lights in the sky. Some are stationary, some are seen moving through the sky, some appear and disappear completely, and some of the drones seem to zip across the horizon at incredible speeds. It is definitely odd. CJ wrote in the video description, "The drones in New Jersey have been seen coming from the ocean for several weeks. We found UAP drones in the middle of the ocean 100%. This is something they don't want you to see." Now, sure, people have access to drones nowadays. There are more things in the sky than there ever have been in history, but it seems like people are spotting particularly bright, rather large objects moving at speeds way too fast to be your over-the-counter drone. And again, the FBI is getting involved. They've investigated around 5,000 reports about these drones, claiming that about 100 of them are considered credible. As of now, there have been no clear answers from authorities on who's behind the drones or what they're up to. This next report comes out again from New Jersey. This time it's not just lights in the sky though. Whatever this object was, it actually affected the clock in a family's car. In early December, a family reported a strange effect while following one of these strange crafts that people have been seeing in the sky. As they drove along, the car's clock suddenly changed time, then went back to normal once they drove away. Local law enforcement in Morris County insists that there's no known threat to public safety, but residents are still trying to figure out what's going on themselves. There's even a Facebook group with over 17,000 members exchanging info on these sightings. One local software engineer, Rich Dunjewski, thinks the clock change might be a clue. He commented, "Many newer cars get their clock time from GPS satellites," adding that the drones could be using GPS jamming or spoofing. He went on to say that if these drones are using, quote, GPS jamming, then it's plausible the car would follow the signal and change the clock. FAA contractor David Lombardo agreed, saying these drones likely have electronic interference capabilities. A strange UAP was captured on camera back in 2018, but the video was kept secret for years. It was just released to the public last year in January of 2024. The object was spotted flying over a US military base in Iraq and was tracked by a military infrared radar. It moved across the base before making a controlled descent into a body of water. About 17 minutes later, it reappeared and took off at an incredible speed. The Pentagon has officially classified it as a UAP. What caught a lot of attention was how quickly the object changed color. You'll notice that the object keeps switching from this semi-translucent look to black. And since the video was shot using infrared, the color changes indicate shifts in temperature. The object was changing temperature so fast that it actually made it difficult for the radar to even track. And according to Dr. Matthew Sadagis, a physics professor at the University of Albany, it was doing this, quote, faster than any known object. This next video comes from the YouTube channel Plant Abundance, who wrote in the description that he'd been outside doing some tree work when this bright object caught his eye. He watched it as it stayed stationary for about a minute and a half before fetching his camera. He caught the tail end of it before it drifted downward and faded out. Again, this is another recent clip posted on October 14th of 2024. Now the object is hard to make out. It's obviously pretty high up, but zooming in, it's definitely not a plane or a satellite. It doesn't even look like your typical drone. It looks like a spherical metallic object. So what is it? I don't know. What do you all think? This footage was taken a few years ago. It's another spherical flying orb. The AARO, the office within the US Department of Defense that handles UAPs, released the footage captured by an MQ-9 Reaper drone during a Senate hearing in the Middle East. The video shows an orb smoothly flying through the sky at a high speed. The AARO came out saying that they had no idea what it was, calling it a genuine UAP, but they also mentioned it was not the first time they'd seen something like it. On December 16th of 2024, tourists at Disney World in Orlando caught sight of a glowing red UFO streaking upward in the night sky. The object kind of looks like a falling star, but in reverse. The video made the rounds on TikTok with people commenting it was a UAP of extraterrestrial origin. Now, unlike a lot of the other stuff on this list, this one may have a very clear explanation, and while that explanation probably isn't aliens, it's still pretty cool. The glowing streak was probably a SpaceX rocket that launched that night. Falcon 9's reusable booster successfully landed in the Atlantic after 8.5 minutes. SpaceX was transporting a GPS satellite for the US military. There was a similar sighting near Disney on December 23rd, also very likely a SpaceX mission. So this final story comes from a new docu-series called Investigation Alien. Footage was captured showing a strange object descending into the English Channel. The series follows journalist George Knapp and his team, including underwater archaeologist Rory Kremer, as they dig into evidence of extraterrestrial life. During one of their expeditions off the coast of Normandy, they spotted an an illuminated object about 200 yards away. At first, it was stationary, but then it sped off, only to return later, but at that point, most of the crew was asleep. Kremer, though, was on night watch, and he was able to capture the object on camera as it plummeted into the water. Knapp was shocked when he saw the footage. He returned Kremer for an explanation, and Kremer, who's been in the field for over 20 years, admitted, "I don't got any answers, do you?" He thought it might be a flare, but it didn't have the typical smoke. As the object disappeared into the water, Knapp suggested it could be tied to some sort of subterranean base. Kremer pointed out that local tribes in the region have long reported unexplained lights, which were often linked to gods. They both agreed that the footage could be evidence of something much bigger lurking beneath the surface. Now, is this story legit or just a clever way of promoting the series? That's for you to decide. But based on everything on this list, could very well be aliens.
Earlier this year, documents were declassified by United States Homeland Security outlining a secret project designated to identifying, acquiring, studying, and reverse engineering AAVs, aka Advanced Aerospace Vehicles. According to the Pentagon, the project never actually went ahead due to the fact that the government was unable to collect any kind of otherworldly spacecrafts. Sure. The document showed that the budget for the program was to be 12 to 15 million in the first year, 25 million in the second, and upwards of 50 million US dollars in the third. And the purpose of the project was to ensure national security by accessing and assessing the advanced technology and determining its threat capabilities. Furthermore, the document stated that another drive for the program was the United States' fear that either China or Russia had possibly already been able to reverse engineer these kind of technologies. Despite all of the information released to the public meticulously outlining the project, Homeland Security stands firm on their claim that the program never actually went ahead because it was never actually approved. Personally, I'm not buying it. It sounds more like a foreign enemy was getting too close to uncovering the mission, and so the government released a bogus declassified statement saying that while there was a project, it never actually went ahead, in order to throw them off the scent. If you agree, consider giving this video a thumbs up. Why not, you guys?
Project Sign. Project Sign was an early US military investigation into unidentified flying objects launched in 1948 after a surge in reported sightings. Everything really kicked off with the Kenneth Arnold sighting, followed by the Roswell incident, and then people were spotting UFOs all over the country. So it was time to investigate these reports and assess whether there was a real threat to national security, especially being that it was the Cold War, of course. The team included experts in astronomy, physics, and psychology, all tasked with analyzing UFO reports and data. Sign was a top secret for most of its operation, but in 1949 some of their findings went public and it was pretty intriguing. Basically, they concluded that a small percentage of UFO sightings couldn't be easily explained away by natural phenomena or known aircraft. So this led some members to hypothesize that UFOs might be of extraterrestrial origin. But right around this time, the project was shut down by General Hoyt Vandenberg, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. It was then replaced by Project Grudge, with a slightly different goal, but more on that in a bit. First, let's kick it over to Hannah.
A joint effort between the National Security Agency of the United States, aka the NSA, and the British intelligence agencies dedicated to training super soldiers in charge of UFO retrieval and security lockdown operations. I have to say, my interest is piqued. Project Mannequin, as it's called, was revealed to the public back in the 2000s by several whistleblowers who claim to have been a part of the project at one point or another. Now, while super soldiers in charge of subduing alien threats does sound pretty cool, unfortunately the recruitment process sounds pretty dark. Apparently agents don't just join the team of their own accord, instead hand over their offspring to the government at a young age for some kind of crazy undisclosed amount of money. According to whistleblower reports, the base for Project Mannequin is located in a top secret facility 60 meters underground in Berkshire in southern England, and this is where the soldiers are trained to become some of the most skilled individuals in the world. Now, because I already know you're going to to ask, the most famous whistleblower of Project Mannequin was Max Spears, who, after leaking information regarding the project to the public, died under incredibly strange and unexplicable circumstances. Unexplicable as in one moment he sat down on his couch and the very next moment he was dead. And to this day, no one knows how it happened, but he believed prior to his death that he was a sleeper agent that had been brainwashed by the government and was involuntarily part of this project. So who knows?
In 1949, Project Sign was replaced with Project Grudge. But now things were different. Their goal wasn't just to assess UFO reports and figure out if they were legitimate. Instead, the purpose was to downplay the presence of UFOs. At the time, the US government was worried that foreign governments could exploit UFO reports, basically causing panic in the public. So Grudge shifted its focus from scientific investigation to straight up debunking UFO reports and reassuring the public that there was nothing extraordinary about the sightings, even when there actually was. J. Allen Hynek, a famous American astronomer, professor, and UFOologist, took issue with Grudge, claiming that it was, quote, less science and more of a public relations campaign, which it was, at least on the surface. Just because they were telling the public UFO sightings were nothing more than balloons, meteors, or optical illusions doesn't mean they were doing research behind the scenes that they felt it best to cover up.
Project Moondust is officially described as a United States project dedicated to recovering the remains of Soviet satellites that re-entered the atmosphere and crashed down to Earth in not only the US but also South Africa, Bolivia, and even the Himalayan mountains. Unofficially, it is possible that the project is actually dedicated to something far more interesting. You know where I'm going with this. The collection and analysis of crashed UFOs. It is believed that while the US claimed to have been recovering satellites, they were actually collecting UFOs, which were then sent out to various military bases throughout the states. The entire thing was revealed by a man named Clifford Stone, who claimed to have been part of the project. Just before his death, he was quoted saying that the entire time the project was going on, they were telling the American public that it had nothing to do with aliens, when in reality, high clearance personnel who were not army officials would always be added to the mission last minute, and they would be the ones to claim ownership of whatever objects were recovered during the mission. These objects were then sent out for testing, analysis, and reverse engineering.
Project Magnet was Canada's government investigation into UFOs. It was launched in December of 1950 by Wilbert B. Smith, a senior radio engineer with the Canadian Department of Transport. Smith had a personal interest in UFOs and believed that they could be scientifically studied. So the main goal of the project was to attempt to figure out what these UFOs were and if it was possible they could be using Earth's magnetic field as a source of propulsion. The project involved setting up monitoring stations across Canada equipped with specialized equipment to detect and analyze magnetic and radio frequency disturbances. Smith hoped that by capturing data from these disturbances, they could find patterns and similarities with UFO sightings. Now, Wilbert Brockhouse Smith was an interesting guy. He did believe that UFOs were of extraterrestrial origin and had psychic abilities. He also believed that aliens were communicating to him through the use of telepathy.
Unbeknownst to some, the United States is not the only one with an Area 51 style top secret UFO alien base. That's right, Russia has their very own version of the not so secret alien bunker located in rural Siberia and referred to as Kapustin Yar. It makes sense. I mean, Russia was the first country to send a living being up to space back in 1957, so it's only natural that they would have some kind of corner on the market of UFO and alien artifacts. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the first living being in space was a dog named Laika, who unfortunately did not make it back down to Earth, but that's a sad, sad story for another day. While some of the non-believers might claim that Kapustin Yar is nothing more than a regular military base used for radar systems, satellite tracking, and low-level nuclear weapons testing, it should be noted that the Russian government didn't even acknowledge the base's existence until 1983, and furthermore, many former employees have claimed that while working on the base, they witnessed not only the reverse engineering of alien spacecrafts, but actual alien autopsies as well. And personally, I feel like this whole nuclear weapons testing thing has become such a popular way for secret military bases to keep people from getting too close. I mean, really, name a better deterrent than radiation poisoning. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to know if aliens exist as much as the next guy, but Nothing is worth that. It's awful. Don't Google it.
Antarctica, yes, all of it. Antarctica has gained quite a reputation for being a hotspot for UFO sightings and theories about secret government bases dedicated to studying them. It's remote, inhospitable, makes for an ideal cover for secretive activities. Nobody really wants to go to Antarctica. It's desolate, the weather sucks. So not only would most people veer clear of it anyway, but makes it very difficult for ordinary people to access, allowing secretive operations to take place in secrecy. Some conspiracy theorists have pointed out images with unusual formations in the ice taken with satellites, which some people think could be entrances to underground military facilities and stuff like that. Some even believe there are pyramid-type structures there buried under the ice that might have been built by some ancient civilization, possibly with the help of extraterrestrials or just built by aliens entirely. The governments of the world, especially the United States and Russia, are said to have established secret research facilities in Antarctica to study alien technology and artifacts.
A top-secret outpost located in the small town of Dulce, New Mexico, was apparently erected in the 1900s to monitor alien communication signals as well as other weird happenings that tend to come with the territory. According to locals living in the town, which has a population of about 2,700 people and not one single traffic light, alien signals were first intercepted in 1979. The following year, something strange happened. The bodies of dead animals began turning up all over town, mutilated in ways that one could not or would not want to explain. I will not be explaining because this is YouTube, not the dark web. In the years that followed, individuals who claimed to have been associated with the base, nicknamed the Dulce Alien Center, started coming forward. One man claimed to have helped build the facility and to even have witnessed a full-on battle between humans and alien beings. After that, UFO sightings in the town skyrocketed, probably because people now knew what to look for. Fast forward to today, and reports of UFO sightings are still pretty common in the small town of Dulce, as well as reports of top secret military projects, despite the fact that the government insists it has a total of 0 bases in the area. But who's buying that?
Majestic 12, often referred to simply as MJ12, is at the heart of pretty much everything we've talked about on this list. The organization is basically the king of government alien cover-up conspiracies. The story goes that in 1947, following the Roswell incident, where a supposed UFO crash occurred, President Truman established Majestic 12 as a secret committee of scientists, military leaders, and government officials whose mission was to investigate and cover up evidence of extraterrestrials. According to conspiracy theorists, MJ12's members included figures from the military, the scientific community, who would manage recovered alien technology, study it, possibly even operate on aliens. Documents about MJ12 allegedly leaked in 1985. UFOologists William Moore and Stanton Friedman claimed they'd been pointed to them by an anonymous whistleblower. One of the most disturbing chapters in the lore of MJ12, though, is their possible involvement in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Why? In order to prevent him from disclosing classified information about UFOs and aliens. We have a whole video on MJ12, so check that one out after this one.
Starting off our list today, we have a 2018 UFO sighting that took place in the skies above North Carolina. Shout out to anyone watching from Elon University. In August of 2018, a man named Javion Hill claims to have spotted a UFO while driving home on US 74 just southwest of Charlotte. He described seeing lights in the clouds above him, shaped like a square. Immediately, he pulled out his phone and began snapping photos, which I have to admit are pretty convincing. After hovering in the sky above Javion for a good amount of time, the illuminated formation just vanished into thin air, as they do. You know how it is. It was as though it had never existed in the first place, but of course it did because there's proof, and we've seen it. And Hill, who says he was never a believer in aliens before that night, claims that during the time in which the object was hovering above him, he was seriously concerned for his safety.
On June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, saw something in the sky near Mount Rainier in Washington, something that he couldn't quite explain. He described 9 strange crescent-shaped objects flying in a V formation, What really caught his attention was how fast these things were moving, at around 1,700 miles per hour, which was faster than any known aircraft at the time. And when Arnold reported what he saw, it ended up getting massive media coverage. The Kenneth Arnold sighting is often referenced as the first big UFO encounter in modern times. After Arnold's sighting, lots of other reports started coming in about strange things in the sky across the United States. The government and military were getting intrigued, and the US Air Force started Project Sign, which was the first official government investigation into UFOs. This later became Project Blue Book, which looked into thousands of UFO sightings to try and figure out what was going on. So is it just one of these cases where he saw something and then everybody else started like getting excited and, just thought they were seeing things? Or was this just the time where UFOs and aliens were starting to come down to investigate things here on Earth?
Next up, we have two commercial pilots on different aircrafts claiming to have seen a mysterious flying object in the sky while flying above Arizona on February 24th of 2018. The first pilot to spot the UFO called into radio traffic control to ask if another plane had passed by him. The controller answered no, and then went on to make a joke about the pilot having possibly seen a UFO. Ground control then contacted another pilot flying an American Airlines flight a little bit behind the first plane and asked the pilot to inform the control center if an aircraft were to pass over the plane. And a short while later, the pilot did exactly that. He said that a fast object had flown 3,000 feet over his plane in the opposite direction of which he was going. Once again, ground control had no knowledge of the aircraft, and it didn't show up on any of the radars either. Both pilots later described the objects as illuminated and incredibly fast, saying that they were nothing like the weather balloons they had seen sometimes floating at that altitude before. Plus, there were no records of this object, so what could it have been? Well, a UFO, duh.
Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was the lead investigator of Project Blue Book in the 50s. His job was to investigate reports of UFOs and find any possible explanation for them. Of course, if there was none, it would be categorized as a genuine UFO. French had shot down a lot of UFO reports over the course of his career, but in 1952, he witnessed something himself, something he could only describe as a genuine alien encounter. He kept what he'd seen a secret for decades. It wasn't until 2013 that he testified before 6 former members of Congress in DC, describing an event that happened back in 1952. A number of residents off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland, had reported spotting 2 unidentified flying objects, so French was tasked with heading over to Canada to basically debunk it. The UFOs had crashed into the water, and when Lieutenant Colonel French arrived, he saw this crowd of about 100 people, including some police, standing by a wharf, gawking at something in the water. French made his way over, and when he looked down into the clear water below, he saw what looked like 2 large circular aircraft-like objects, and there were apparently 2 beings working on them. French described the creatures as, quote, 2 to 3 feet tall, light gray in color, very thin, long arms with either 2 or 3 fingers, the top of their heads much wider than their jawline. Their eyes were very slanted, and you couldn't see pupils in them. He then described the objects slowly rising out from the water before abruptly accelerating and taking off into the sky.
Next up, we have the very first record of a UFO encounter to take place in New England, USA, which I bet you didn't know was actually a major hotspot for extraterrestrial UFO and UAP activity. That's unidentified aerial phenomena, for those of you who don't know. The first recorded sighting happened in Boston, New England, and it was also the first ever documented sighting in the US as a whole. It took place in 1639, and credible reports have been popping up ever since. The record was a second-hand observation recorded by colony founder and governor at the time, John Winthrop, who wrote that a sober, discreet man had seen the sky above Boston become illuminated by a green light while he was rowing his boat along the river one evening. The light was still for a moment and appeared to be flaming, and then it morphed its shape and darted off into the night sky towards Charlestown. The encounter lasted for 3 hours, with the object in the the sky, going higher into the air and then rushing down closer to Earth again and again, back and forth. By the time it ended, which it did when the object just disappeared into the night, the man along with his boatmates had traveled 1 mile upstream with absolutely no memory of how they had gotten there.
This next one has to be the wildest alien encounter case in recent history. So in March of 2023, something strange went down in a small Bolivian village called Horania. It all started with reports of a mysterious green light hovering in the sky. People whipped out their phones to capture the event, having no idea what the hell they were looking at. But unlike a lot of your typical UFO cases, this one doesn't just end with people seeing something strange in the sky. Things get way weirder. So 2 days later, residents claimed to have seen tiny beings darting around the town at night. One villager, Rita Marquez, described them as little and almost like goblins. Some locals even claimed to have found one of these small creatures dead in a gutter one morning, only for its body to vanish soon after. So, a lot to unpack here. Strange lights, possible aircraft, little beings running around the streets at night, and even a mysterious disappearance of one of these dead creatures. I don't know what to make of this case. Whenever there's a whole bunch of witnesses like this, I find it very interesting though.
Next up, we have Barney and Betty Hill's extraterrestrial encounter, which took place on September 19th of 1961 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where the couple claimed to have been abducted by aliens. The ordeal started when the pair saw a bright light in the sky around 10:30 p.m. while driving home after a night out. Betty asked Barney to stop the car so that they could get a better look. He did, and then pulled out a pair of binoculars. What they saw was a massive, oddly shaped spacecraft with multicolored lights. They tried to drive away, but the spaceship, which they believed to have been at least 40 feet long, followed them, getting closer and closer until it was hovering directly in front of the pair's car. Barney claims he was able to clearly make out 6 to 8 humanoid figures standing on the ship who instructed Barney and Betty not to move, but rather to just keep looking towards the ship. The next thing the pair remembered, they had driven 35 miles away from their destination with no recollection of doing so. They tried to write down as much as they could about the experience on their way home, but their memories quickly became fragmented. It wasn't until years later, under hypnosis, that the pair separately both recalled being taken onto the ship and then separated from one another and examined by the humanoid alien life forms. In the days after the incident, however, both Betty and Barney's watches stopped working, and Barney noticed tiny, circles on the back of his truck, and when he put his compass near them, it went haywire. So, I'm not saying they were telling the truth, but I think they might have been telling the truth.
This next story is very outlandish, but it's an entertaining story, and I haven't talked about it before, so here it goes. Back in 2021, Angelina Lynn Johnston held a news conference in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Johnston claims to be a former retired defense intelligence officer who had an encounter with various alien species at a secret base in the Mojave Desert. She claimed that in January of 2010, a few years before she ran as a Democrat candidate for South Dakota Senate, she had met up with a couple in South Carolina who ended up taking her to this secret base. She didn't provide details on exactly where the base was in the desert, but said that she would be taking an astronaut along with a few scientists to the base, which had been built into the side of a mountain. She described seeing various alien species, including one that looked a bit like a praying mantis type creature, and that the beings all spoke to her through telepathy.
Next up, we have the Exeter incident, which took place in Exeter, New Hampshire in 1965 and actually inspired a best-selling novel, Incident at Exeter: Unidentified Flying Objects Over America Now, by John G. Fuller. Not sponsored. One evening in Exeter, a police officer patrolling Highway Route 101 stopped to check on a woman parked on the side of the road. When he asked her what was wrong, she answered in breathless hysterics. She claimed that a large red flying object with flashing lights had been chasing her. Just a few hours later, the police heard a similar story from another man, a hitchhiker who claimed to have seen 5 bright lights in the sky while walking along Route Route 150. He told officers that they had been about 100 feet away from where he had stood, and he watched as they hovered over a home before moving over to the airspace above a large field, and then disappearing and reappearing several times. Curious, one of the policemen went with the hitchhiker back to the spot where he claimed to have seen the UFOs, and sure enough, there it was. And another officer arrived shortly after to see the exact same thing. 5 bright lights high up in the sky disappearing into and reappearing from the trees over and over again. And then, over the next few weeks, authorities in Exeter received almost 60 other reports of UFO sightings in the area. So, if you like aliens and UFOs and Exeter was not on your bucket list, you might want to rethink that decision.
Finally, we have a case where 3 UFOs hijacked a pilot's plane in midair. This is about as disturbing a close encounter as it gets, as this man just narrowly escaped death. The pilot's name is Carlos de los Santos. In 1975, he'd been flying back to Mexico City. It was just another routine flight until it wasn't. Carlos spotted something on his right wing. It was this silver disc-like object about 13 feet in length. It was just right on top of the wing. Then he saw an identical object on top of his left wing. And as if that wasn't enough, a third object appeared, and this one was heading straight for him. In a panic, Carlos tried to steer his plane away, but the controls weren't responding. Luckily, the object just missed him though. He frantically radioed air traffic control, explaining that he'd lost control and was surrounded by these strange disc objects. And then, to his complete and utter horror, the plane suddenly veered completely off course. It was now ascending higher and higher up into the sky. Carlos had absolutely no control over the plane now. But then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the strange objects flew away. And miraculously, thankfully, Carlos regained control of the aircraft. The Kecksburg incident took place on December 9th, 1965, and it's often referred to as Pennsylvania's Roswell. On that evening, a bright fireball was spotted across 6 US states and even parts of Canada, particularly over Detroit and Windsor. Witnesses reported seeing a large object streak through the sky, creating sonic booms and even causing some grass fires in Michigan and northern Ohio. In Kecksburg, about 30 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, locals described hearing a thump and seeing blue smoke. The US Army and state police sealed off the area where the object was believed to have landed, but when search teams arrived, they apparently found nothing. Authorities claimed that it was likely just a meteor, but decades later in 2005, NASA released a statement saying that fragments from the area had been analyzed and came from a Soviet satellite. They also said that the records detailing this had been lost in 1987. The whole thing just felt very fishy. Was the object an extraterrestrial craft, debris from a Soviet space probe, a military satellite? Till this day, we still don't know. On June 21st, 1947, Harold Dahl, a harbor patrolman, claimed he saw 6 donut-shaped craft hovering over Maury Island, Washington. According to Dahl, one of these craft began releasing debris that resembled light metal, which he said caused injuries to his dog and a crew member. A man named Kenneth Arnold heard about the story, and having just recently reported seeing unidentified flying objects himself, he was pretty interested in the case. Arnold interviewed Dahl and his fellow crew member Fred Chrisman. They showed him fragments of what they said came from this UFO. The US Air Force flew in to investigate, but then their plane mysteriously crashed, killing both the officers inside. Then the FBI concluded that the sighting had been a hoax. Dahl himself allegedly told investigators that if questioned, he would claim it was all made up to avoid any trouble. Edward Ruppelt, the head of Project Blue Book, later characterized the Maury Island incident as the dirtiest hoax in UFO history. But was it just a hoax? Some think that the hoax explanation may have been a cover-up to distract from something bigger, like military operations or technology that the government wanted to keep secret.
On the night of March 24th, 1967, something happened at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. Robert Salas, a then 26-year-old U.S. Air Force lieutenant, was in a secure underground launch control center overseeing 10 Minutemen intercontinental ballistic missiles when everything went dark. Just before the missile systems failed, a security officer on the surface frantically called Salas, saying that there was a glowing oval-shaped object hovering above the base. Apparently the object exhibited strange movements. It had stopped suddenly and made sharp turns that no aircraft at the time would have been capable of making. Salas felt that they were under attack, but not by any known threat. I mean, what type of technology could have disabled the missiles? Within 10 seconds, all 10 missiles had just disabled at the same time. This had never happened before. After the incident, Salas was instructed not to discuss what happened and signed a non-disclosure agreement. For decades, he kept quiet, but in the mid-90s, he started sharing this story. He later discovered that just 8 days prior to his experience, another similar incident had occurred at Minnow Air Force Base in North Dakota, where 10 more missiles were disabled. Salas estimates that within a 6-month span, a total of 30 nuclear missiles were affected. Official Air Force documents declassified in 1996 confirmed these events at Malmstrom. One of the most talked about topics in recent years is the Navy's released UFO videos. In December of 2017, the New York Times revealed 3 videos recorded by US Navy pilots that were encounters with mysterious flying objects. The videos, named FLIR-1, Gimbal, and Go Fast, were filmed during training exercises off the coast of San Diego and East Coast. The footage showed UAPs moving at incredible speeds, performing all these maneuvers that didn't look like any known aircraft. The objects appeared to be flying against the wind, changing direction instantly, and looked to have no visible propulsion. The Navy pilots used advanced infrared cameras capturing the heat signatures of these objects. In the gimbal video, you can even hear how amazed and shocked the pilots are. In 2019, the Pentagon officially released these videos, confirming they were authentic, and stated that they were part of a larger program to investigate UAPs. The US Department of Defense established the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force to assess these encounters and any potential threats they might pose to national security. What's fascinating is that some military personnel, including former Navy pilot David Fravor, have come forward describing their experiences with these UAPs, saying that these encounters are still unexplained. The Belgian UFO waves spanned from November of 1989 to April of 1990. It all started on November 29th, 1989, with reports of large, triangular objects flying at low altitudes across Belgium. A lot of the witnesses described these crafts as having lights underneath. On the night of March 30th to the 31st of 1990, the Control Reporting Center in the village of Glons received reports of unusual lights moving through the sky. In response, 2 fighter jets were sent to investigate. The pilots were able to get radar locks on targets, but they reported seeing nothing unusual. Over the following weeks, 143 people or so reported seeing something in the sky that night, but all these accounts came in after the fact. Eyewitnesses claimed to see 4 lights in a square formation making erratic movements before disappearing. Some believe the Belgian UFO wave case was a genuine UFO. Others think that this could be a case of mass hysteria, but what do you all think? On July 11th, 1991, Mexico City experienced a total solar eclipse, but as the sky darkened, people down below saw something they'd never been expecting to see. Guillermo Aragon, a television executive, was filming the eclipse from his rooftop when he noticed a strange object hovering above. His footage caught the attention of Jaime Maussan, a well-known Mexican journalist. He described his reaction, saying, "When I saw it, I said, oh my god, this is a UFO, a real UFO." 8 days later, Maussan aired the footage in a special broadcast. The response was overwhelming, with the network receiving 40,000 calls at once. Viewers began sending in their own videos too, and at least 7 showed similar objects in the sky. One 19-year-old student named Eric Aguilar described seeing a white dot that transformed into a larger, shining object. Meanwhile, 60 miles away, businessman Luis Lara captured another video of a metallic object
Moussan noted that many of these reports and videos were very similar. It looked like people had spotted the same UFO at different locations. 2 months later, engineer Vicente Sanchez recorded another shiny object during a military air show, describing its undulating movement, and a year after that, a similar object appeared at the same air show, moving against the wind. Since that eclipse, Mexico has just seen thousands of UFO sightings, like this next one. Another one of the most fascinating UFO sightings in Mexico took place on March 5th of 2004, when Mexican Air Force pilots came across a series of mysterious glowing objects over southern Campeche state. They spotted a total of 11 unidentified flying objects and quickly started filming them as they hovered around in their jet. The footage goes on for a long time. You get to see these things clearly gliding across the sky at high speed in this organized formation. This was definitely not your typical flash in the sky kind of sighting. The pilots attempted to follow the objects, but they eventually vanished from sight. Project Sign was an official U.S. government study on UFOs initiated by the United States Air Force in 1948. The project was an early attempt to investigate the growing number of unidentified flying object sightings following World War II. Project Sign was established under Air Force General Nathan Twining, head of the Air Technical Service Command. Its primary goal was to collect and evaluate all available information on UFO sightings. There was a lot of paranoia surrounding UFOs at this time. This was right after World War II, and many thought that these mysterious objects could pose a real risk. On April 27, 1949, the Air Force released a report summarizing what they'd gathered so far. The document indicated that some UFOs seemed to be genuine aircraft, but that there wasn't enough evidence to determine their origin. Most sightings were explained as misidentified objects, though, but the report did call for an ongoing investigation. Retired Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt later claimed in his 1956 book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, that Project Sign had produced an estimate of the situation, suggesting an extraterrestrial origin for these UFOs. But General Hoyt Vandenberg, the chief of staff at the Air Force, ended up shutting down the project because of a lack of any proof. Following Project Sign, there was Project Grudge, which took a much more skeptical stance on UFOs. This project just outright dismissed reports as misidentifications, mass hysteria, or hoaxes. It seemed like they had a very clear agenda to discredit witnesses and make the idea of unidentified flying objects and aliens just seem silly to the public. Before Project Sign, there was Majestic 12, or MJ-12, a secretive group that supposedly formed to investigate the Roswell incident in 1947. Allegedly, this group consisted of 12 scientists, military officials, and politicians tasked with examining the alien spacecraft that reportedly crashed in New Mexico. Eyewitnesses claimed the craft carried extraterrestrials, prompting the need for a covert operation that would later lead to the establishment of Area 51. But back to Roswell for a moment. At first, the military actually announced they recovered a flying disc, but they quickly changed their tune, saying it was just a weather balloon. This inconsistency seemed highly suspect, especially as witnesses like rancher Mac Brazel described strange debris and strange-looking, almost non-human bodies being recovered from the scene. Now, interest in MJ-12 began in the late 70s when a letter allegedly from President Truman was leaked, authorizing the creation of this secret organization. Some documents were later found that referenced MJ-12, though the government insists these are fake. But 2 classified documents in the National Archives do mention MJ-12. Some believe that MJ-12 used advanced alien technology to influence human thoughts or even erase people's memories. It's also believed that MJ-12 was involved in overseeing alien abductions, allowing extraterrestrials to abduct people in exchange for advanced tech, which they reverse engineer at Area 51, which houses alien crafts and possibly even aliens themselves. Project Blue Book was a U.S. Air Force program that investigated UFO sightings from 1952 to 1969. It followed earlier programs, Project Sign and Project Grudge, but Blue Book became the most comprehensive effort to study UFOs.
Project Blue Book collected over 12,000 UFO reports. Of these, about 700 stayed classified as unexplained after investigation. The project focused on two main questions. Were UFOs a threat to national security? And were they actually of extraterrestrial origin? The answers to these questions were made less clear to the public than the public would have hoped. One of the most interesting cases investigated by Blue Book was the 1966 Michigan UFO sightings, where a number of people, including police officers, reported seeing strange lights in the sky. The Air Force dismissed the reports at first, but people were so adamant about what they saw that they were forced to reevaluate the incident. In 1967, a panel of scientists reviewed the evidence and ultimately deemed the sightings, quote, not entirely explainable. By the late 60s, the Air Force began to wind down Project Blue Book, saying they just hadn't gathered enough evidence for extraterrestrial life. The project officially ended in December of 1969, with the Air Force releasing a final report that concluded UFOs did not pose a threat and that most sightings could be attributed to misidentified aircraft, balloons, or astronomical phenomena. But to this day, many believe the government cover up evidence of actual extraterrestrial encounters.
Next up on our list is the Kecksburg incident that occurred in 1965 in rural Pennsylvania. On one crisp autumn day, residents witnessed a fiery object streaking across the sky before crashing into the dense woods near the town of Kecksburg. Eyewitnesses described the object as acorn-shaped and made of a strange metallic material. What's even more intriguing is how quickly authorities swooped in, cordoning off the area and removing any evidence. Despite explanations ranging from a meteor to a secret military satellite, the abrupt removal of the supposed craft and conflicting witness testimonies have only deepened this mystery. The Kecksburg incident remains a highly debated event, with many convinced that it was no ordinary piece of space debris, but rather evidence of something far more extraordinary. Heading to the American Southwest, our next point centers on an encounter in Socorro, New Mexico in 1973, a case that remains one of the most credible UFO sightings ever recorded. Local police officer Lonnie Zamora reported a close encounter with a mysterious egg-shaped craft that landed briefly near his patrol route. Zamora's account is particularly compelling because he described detailed observations of the craft's structure and behavior, noting that it emitted a powerful, almost magnetic glow and left scorch marks on the ground. His report was taken very seriously by both military investigators and UFO researchers, who found that the physical evidence at the scene corroborated his story. This incident continues to be cited as one of the best documented examples of an unexplained aerial phenomenon, challenging conventional wisdom and inviting ongoing debate. In the vast expanses of Texas near Duncan, a routine drive turned into a nightmare on a warm day in 1980 for three individuals: Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Colby Landrum. They encountered a diamond-shaped craft emitting intense heat and a strange, pulsating glow. As they approached, the object released a burst of energy that not only scorched the nearby ground, but also exposed them to what they described as high levels of radiation. The physical injuries and lingering health issues reported by the witnesses lent a terrifying credibility to the event. Despite extensive investigations, authorities have been unable to conclusively explain what occurred that day, leaving the Cash-Landrum incident as one of the most unsettling and medically documented UFO encounters. Next, we travel to the skies over Alabama in 1948, where commercial pilots Wiley Childs and his co-pilot Whitted experienced an encounter that would soon spark widespread curiosity. While cruising at altitude, they observed a bright, saucer-like object following their aircraft, executing maneuvers that no conventional plane could match. The object darted away at impossible speeds, leaving behind a trail of questions rather than answers. Although the incident was initially brushed off as an optical illusion by some, the pilot's reputations and detailed accounts have ensured that this encounter remains a significant piece of aviation and UFO lore. Its early date and credible witnesses continue to invite debate about what the pilots really saw that day. Venturing into the rugged wilderness of Manitoba here in Canada, we encounter the infamous Falcon Lake incident of 1967. While exploring near Falcon Lake, Stefan Michalak came face to face with a glowing, cigar-shaped object that descended from the sky. As he drew near, the craft seemed to radiate an intense heat, and he later suffered unusual burns on his chest and hands, injuries that defied typical explanations. His physical evidence, including peculiar markings and radiation-like effects, has been thoroughly documented by local authorities and independent researchers. The Falcon Lake incident stands as one of the most chilling examples of direct human contact with an unknown aerial phenomenon, raising enduring questions about the nature of that encounter. In 1965, the quiet town of Exeter, New Hampshire found itself at the center of an extraordinary UFO event that involved a diverse group of witnesses. This included local police officers and everyday residents. According to multiple reports, a bright, disc-shaped object appeared in the sky and executed a series of maneuvers that defied conventional aeronautics. What set this case apart was the willingness of local law enforcement to document and investigate the sighting, lending an unusual degree of official credibility. Despite exhaustive searches and numerous interviews, no trace of the object was ever found, and its sudden disappearance only deepened the mystery. Our next case takes us back to the late 19th century in Aurora, Texas. According to local lore and sporadic newspaper reports from 1897, a mysterious object streaked across the sky and crashed in broad daylight. Witnesses claimed the impact left a smoking crater and remnants of an unusual metallic craft. While many dismiss this tale as folklore or a misinterpretation of natural events, its persistence in regional history makes it one of America's oldest UFO crash stories. Researchers note that the detailed accounts describing a loud explosion, strange noises, and even hints of an extraterrestrial design set the stage for later UFO narratives. Despite skepticism and a lack of physical evidence surviving to the present day, the Aurora incident remains an enduring mystery that continues to spark debate among UFO enthusiasts and historians. Heading to the Middle East, our next case unfolds in Tehran, Iran in 1976. During a tense period marked by political and military uncertainties, Iranian Air Force jets were scrambled to intercept an unidentified luminous object. Pilots reported that as they approached, their instruments malfunctioned and the craft seemed to emit a dazzling light that temporarily disrupted radar and communication systems. The incident was thoroughly documented by military personnel, and the pilots' detailed testimonies described a craft that moved with agility far beyond known aircraft capabilities. Although official explanations ranged from sensor glitches to atmospheric anomalies, many experts find these responses unsatisfactory. The Tehran UFO incident remains one of the most credible and confusing cases from the region, fueling ongoing investigations into whether advanced technology or something beyond our understanding was at work that day. Our next case takes us to the remote landscapes of Montana, where in 1967, an incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base left a lasting imprint on UFO lore. During this episode, military personnel observed unexplained lights near missile silos, and reports emerged that these mysterious phenomena coincided with temporary malfunctions of nuclear missile systems. The eerie connection between the UFO sightings and the sensitive equipment on board the base has led many to speculate about the possibility of advanced non-terrestrial technology interfering with human military assets. Although official statements have at times suggested sensor errors or natural phenomena, the precise timing and detailed eyewitness accounts from trained personnel make the Malmstrom incident one of the most serious and disturbing cases in UFO history. For many, many, the idea that such encounters could potentially impact national security only works to deepen the mystery. In 1987, the quiet surroundings of Akita Prefecture in Japan were shadowed by an encounter that left locals both terrified and intrigued. Multiple witnesses, including local police officers and residents, reported seeing a bright metallic craft that hovered silently before accelerating out of sight. The incident was particularly striking due to the detailed descriptions provided by those on the scene. Accounts noted precise, almost military-like maneuvers that defied conventional aeronautical behavior. Japanese authorities conducted investigations, yet the official records remain inconclusive, and many aspects of the event continue to puzzle experts. The Akita UFO incident not only highlights the global nature of these unexplained phenomena, but also reinforces the idea that such encounters can occur anywhere. Quiet rural regions are not immune to witnessing the extraordinary.
On June 24th of 1947, while searching for a crashed military aircraft, pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 UFOs flying over the Cascade Mountains of Washington state in the US. The objects were flying in formation at a height of about 10,000 feet and a speed of approximately 1,900 kilometers per hour, which was not possible at the time, for humans that is. Kenneth described the way the objects moved as jerky, like rocks skipping over the water, flashing forward at strange intervals. When the media got a hold of the story, they coined the phrase flying saucer, and the UFO craze took off at hyperspeed, especially when on July 7th, a local rancher named Mac Brazel called the sheriff to let him know that one of those objects had somehow ended up on his farm, and this came to be known as the Roswell incident.
It was back in July of 1947 that something strange happened near Roswell, New Mexico. Something had crashed into the ground, into Brazel's farm. There were metal pieces, rubber strips, and a strange tin foil-like material. The nearby Roswell Army airfield was alerted. The military came out and collected the debris. At first, they issued a press release saying they had recovered an unknown flying disc. This really got people talking, but just a day later the Army changed their story, saying it was actually just a weather balloon. Now, while some of the public took this at face value, it caused some controversy, especially in the years to come. People started to believe that the military was covering up something much bigger, possibly an alien spacecraft crash. Over the years, people started to come forward claiming to have seen the wreckage, and not only were there strange markings on the material described by some as hieroglyphics, but the material was incredibly strong and seemed to almost be impossible to burn. Oh, and of course, people who'd been called to the site to recover the material claimed to have seen bodies that were clearly not human. Over the years, many people have questioned the official explanation for this incident. Even former military personnel and locals said they saw strange things at the crash site, like debris that didn't look like it came from any known aircraft, and even small bodies that didn't seem human. In 1994, the US Air Force released a report saying the debris was from a top secret project called Project Mogul, a project that used high altitude balloons to detect Soviet nuclear tests. They said the unusual materials found were just parts of these balloons and their sensors, but this explanation didn't satisfy everyone. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of the incident, the Air Force released another report to address the claims about these alien bodies. They said these were actually just crash test dummies used in military experiments, not extraterrestrial beings. But again, a lot of people were and still are highly skeptical of this. The Roswell incident happened less than 2 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan in 1945. Those bombs were created through a secret project that lasted 3 years and had 3 main sites, including one in New Mexico. So if the government could keep the atomic bomb a secret for so long, why wouldn't they be able and willing to hide information about a crashed UFO landing? Plus, little mannequins? I think most people would look at that and be able to tell the difference between an alien and a crash test dummy.
So this foreign object that landed on Mac Brazel's farm actually did so a few days prior to him calling into the sheriff's department. To be honest, he hadn't thought much of it until he started reading about Kenneth Arnold, flying saucers, and UFOs in the papers. Once he learned about the possible presence of technologically advanced ships with no known origin that likely came from outer space, he began to wonder if that was in fact what had landed on his farm just a few nights ago, and so he gathered up some of the debris and took them down to the local police station. In response, the sheriff immediately contacted the nearby army base, and soon intelligence officer Jesse Marcel had arrived on the scene and instructed Brazel to take him to the crash site so that the two could collect more debris. So let's talk about Jesse Marcel, the first military officer to step foot on the scene of the crash, because apparently Jesse had a lot to say, according to his son Jesse Jr., who went on to tell his father's story after his death in 1986. According to Jesse Jr., in 1947, when he was just 10 years old, his father woke him up in the middle of the night, excited after having visited the crash site. Jesse Jr. sat up as Jesse Sr. handed him some of the debris he had collected earlier that day on Brazel's farm, and he told Jesse Jr. to get a good look because the debris were something that he would never see again. They were not of this earth, and the pair simply could not make sense of them. Out of all of the debris his father had brought home, Jesse Jr. said that the one that fascinated him most was a small beam with purple-hued hieroglyphics. I suppose it's not difficult to see why the pair didn't believe the government when they released a report saying that what had been found on the Brazel's farm was nothing more than a discarded weather balloon. But of course, you don't mess with the government. And so for years, both Jesse Jr. and his father kept quiet about what they had seen. That is until in the late 1970s, a man named Stanton Friedman showed up asking questions. Stanton T. Friedman, a nuclear physicist turned ufologist, tracked down Jesse Sr. after being tipped off that a retired military man might know something about the Roswell incident, something that had been kept from the public for the past 31 years. And it turns out he did. Jesse Sr. told Friedman that the weather balloon story had in fact been a cover-up, and that the original wreckage had been replaced with a weather balloon shortly after military personnel first arrived on the scene. Not only that, but Jesse claimed that despite what their superiors had wanted them to believe, it was incredibly clear to everyone working on the site that the object had in fact been an extraterrestrial spaceship with outstanding craftsmanship and incredibly advanced out-of-this-world technologies. Although, unfortunately, Jesse did claim that he never got to witness the alleged aliens inside of the craft being pulled out, but still, he's ex-military, he was there. It's a pretty compelling case if you ask me.
There are also witnesses aside from Brazel's claiming to have seen some strange things. So many of these witnesses stayed silent for years, but eventually began speaking out to close friends or family about what they'd seen, still fearing repercussions from the government. There was another crash site about 40 miles from Brazel's ranch where more wreckage and alien bodies were said to be being recovered. A firefighter who went to this site claimed that he saw a large disc in the ground and several small, non-human bodies nearby. He said that military officials told him to keep quiet about what he saw. Sergeant Melvin Brown also shared his experience. He said he rode in a truck with the bodies from the crash site to Roswell Field and then stood guard at the hangar where they were first kept. He was instructed not to look under a tarp, but he got curious and he peeked. He claimed he saw 2 alien bodies. The government has always denied his claims, but several people who were there or knew people who were there have said they saw wreckage and bodies arrive at Wright Field. Retired General Arthur Exon stated that a top secret committee was set up to oversee the investigation of this and other classified UFO incidents. After the Roswell crash, the debris was secretly flown from Fort Worth, Texas to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. At Wright Field, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Exon, who later became the base commander, recalled that some of the material was very thin, but incredibly strong. And it wasn't just metal that arrived at Wright Field either. At the second crash site a few miles from the first, they discovered a smaller, more intact craft and 4 bodies lying nearby. These bodies did not look human. Again, according to witnesses, the bodies were described as being in fairly good condition despite having been exposed for 6 days. Some parts of the bodies have been chewed on by animals. Descriptions from those who saw the bodies are pretty consistent. They were said to be 4 to 5 feet tall, with big heads, large eyes, and small mouths. Basically your classic idea of an alien. They had thin bodies with long arms and 4 fingers. An army nurse who worked on the initial autopsy described how fragile the skulls and bones were too. The bodies were quickly placed in large, sealed wooden crates, loaded onto a B-29 bomber and flown to Fort Worth before being sent to Wright Field.
Now, the general public weren't the only ones concerned with the Roswell crash. In fact, one of the highest members of government was too, the president, which at the time was Harry S. Truman. After the incident took place, Truman became increasingly interested and concerned with UFOs, so much so that in 1948 he called a meeting with his military aide, Colonel Robert Laundrie, in the Oval Office to discuss UFO reports and what they might mean for the security of the country. Laundrie told Truman that, quote, all manner of objects and things were being seen in the sky by people as of late, which only led the president to worry more about the possibility of new, never-before-seen threats to the American people. And so Truman ordered a quarterly oral report from both Laundrie and the Air Force to be presented to him at the White House to discuss whether or not the UFO sightings would present any kind of immediate danger. Although neither the military or the Air Force were ever able or willing to provide Truman with any answers, the UFO sightings kept coming, and officials became more and more confused. To this day, it's unclear what information the government has gathered on UFOs, but what we do know is that if they do in fact have concrete evidence supporting the existence of alien life forms, they sure as heck aren't sharing it with us. Yet, fingers crossed.
The Roswell incident was the catalyst for pretty much every modern UFO conspiracy today. Before Roswell, the idea of aliens was just that, really, an idea. But when stories about this mysterious crash hit the papers, it really changed the public's view of the possibility of alien life. Forever. Suddenly, what people had read about in science fiction and fantasy novels or watched on the big screen was something a lot more concrete. Project Blue Book formed a few years after the Roswell incident, a genuine Air Force program dedicated to investigating UFOs, at least in the early days. Area 51, the mysterious Men in Black, Majestic 12, all of these things started being whispered about in the years following the Roswell incident. In August of 1976, 4 men went on a camping trip in the Allagash Wilderness in Maine. Jack and Jim Weiner, along with Chuck Rack and Charlie Foltz, were off on what was supposed to be this peaceful getaway when things took a turn. On their second night, Jim spotted a bright object in the sky. It was there for about 30 seconds, then it disappeared. Not super out of the ordinary in the deep woods, the sky is just lit up with stars at night, easy to misidentify things, but 2 nights later, while they were out fishing, the same bright object appeared a second time. Chuck noticed it at first. It looked super intense. This time it was almost like the sun, they said, and they watched it as it followed them along the water. Charlie, thinking it was some kind of signal, even tried to flash an SOS to the object. And that's when things got really weird. They described this light shooting a beam down towards them, which followed them all the way back to shore. And when they got back to their campsite, something else was off. The fire they'd left burning was completely out, and they felt totally exhausted, like they'd been gone for hours. The next few days were uneventful, and they didn't see the light again, but after they got back home, the men started having these disturbing nightmares, often about sitting naked on a bench, feeling afraid. That night stuck with the men, but it wasn't until 1988 that they finally had enough and decided to seek out answers. Jim reached out to UFO researcher Ray Fowler, and they all agreed to undergo hypnosis to try and make sense of these strange memories. And under this hypnosis, each man recalled being abducted by aliens. They described terrifying beings practicing medical exams on them, even having their skin and bodily fluids taken. Later, when they compared notes, they realized that their memories matched up exactly. They even passed polygraph tests. On the night of October 11th, 1973 in Pascagoula, Mississippi, 2 men, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, had a terrifying encounter they were never able to explain. While fishing off a pier by the Pascagoula River, they heard a strange whirring sound and saw flashing blue lights. Next thing they knew, an oval-shaped object about 30 to 40 feet across appeared above them. They were completely paralyzed as 3 bizarre creatures with robotic, slit mouths and crab-like pincers took them aboard the craft. Once inside, Hickson and Parker claimed the creatures performed some kind of examination on them. They both stayed silent for years about the details, but Hickson eventually opened up, even writing a book in 1983 about the encounter. Parker was quieter at first, but started attending UFO conventions, and in 2018, he released his own book, giving his side of the story for the first time. In 2019, the site of the abduction was marked with a plaque to honor the event, and Parker, deeply emotional, said he wanted to be buried there someday. Hickson passed away in 2011, but Parker continued to speak about the encounter until his death in 2023. Of course, some say the two made this story up, but what if they didn't? What if something actually happened to these two men that they were never able to forget? And writing it all down and sharing their story with the world was their only way of working through something that they couldn't even begin to understand. In 1979, Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson from Marshall County, Minnesota, had a strange encounter while on patrol. On the night of August 27th, around 2 a.m., he saw a beam of light just above the road near Stephen, Minnesota. The light shot toward him and engulfed his squad car. Johnson reported hearing glass breaking before losing consciousness. When he came to, 39 minutes had passed. The car's windshield was shattered, one of the headlights and the red emergency light were damaged, and the radio antenna was bent. When backup deputies arrived, they found Johnson's squad car sideways on the road. He had bruises and eye irritation, which a doctor later compared to burns from a welder's torch. When Johnson's story came out, it gained a lot of attention. All it did was make matters worse, though. Johnson would later say it, understandably, caused a lot of emotional distress for him and his family. Till this day, nobody knows exactly what happened that night, but part of me wonders if he just got into a car accident and was too embarrassed to admit it. Not to ruin the party or anything, but I don't know. What do you all think of this one? This next one is really weird, so strap in. So in 1957, a Brazilian farmer named Antonio Vilas Boas had one of the craziest nights of his life. On October 15th, while working late in the fields, he spotted this bright red star-like object in the sky. The object came down, eventually landing. It was an egg-shaped craft, and from it came these humanoid figures. They were about 5 feet tall with small blue eyes and white hair, and they were dressed in what looked like these gray overalls or equipment, and they had these helmets on. Before he knew it, Antonio was grabbed and taken aboard the craft. Once inside, the aliens took samples of his bodily fluids and performed a whole series of other medical examinations. Then they led him into another room, where he was introduced to a female humanoid, according to him, a very attractive one. He described her as having small round eyes, white hair, and a human-like appearance, and after some strange interactions, well, you can guess what happened next. And once the bizarre encounter was over, the craft released him back into the field and took off. Antonio, understandably shaken, eventually told his family about it. Not sure how that conversation would have gone, but I'm gonna assume it was awkward. His story soon caught the attention of the Brazilian military and the media. People had a lot of questions. Some thought his story was incredible, some just laughed him off, but Antonio stuck by his story all the way up until his death in 1991. On September 3rd of 1965, 18-year-old Norman Muscarello was hitchhiking home along Route 150 in New Hampshire. Around 2 a.m., he saw 5 bright red lights hovering above the trees. At first he thought they were police or fire lights, but when he got closer he realized the lights were coming from a massive object around 80 to 90 feet wide, but somehow was completely silent. Panicking, he drove into a ditch and watched in horror as this object started moving toward him, before changing direction and hovering over a nearby farmhouse. Norman ran to a neighbor's house for help, but he got no response. Eventually he flagged down a car and was driven to the local police station, where he told Officer Reginald Toland about what he saw. Toland was already familiar with Muscarello and he took him seriously. He radioed Officer Eugene Bertrand to investigate, and when they went back to the sighting location, the object did appear again, hovering silently and rocking back and forth. The officers just stood there completely stunned, not knowing what to do, before the thing disappeared. After the police reported the incident, the Air Force investigated, but their helpful explanation was that it was just stars or a military exercise. Muscarello and the officers weren't so convinced, nor are a lot of people who've heard about the story in the years since. In 1961, Betty and Barney Hill, a couple from New Hampshire, became one of the most famous cases of alien abduction. After a vacation, they were driving home when they noticed this strange light in the sky. At first, Betty thought it was a falling star, but it moved erratically, and it was getting larger and brighter. Eventually, Barney decided to just pull over so they could take a look. As they watched, Betty saw some sort of craft with multicolored lights moving across the moon. They continued to stare for a while, but what happened next nearly gave them a heart attack. Suddenly, the craft dropped down toward their car and just hovered above it. Barney stepped out, and using binoculars, he looked up to see a bunch of what he said were humanoid figures inside this craft. One figure seemed to communicate with him telepathically, warning him to stay where he was. Terrified, Barney ran back to the car, and the couple just sped off. As they drove away, they heard a strange beeping sound, and then they lost track of time, suddenly finding themselves near Concord hours later than they'd expected. When they got home, they noticed other odd things too. Their clothes were damaged, their watches had stopped working, and there was a strange pink powder on Betty's dress. The Hills couldn't explain what had happened, and both underwent hypnosis sessions later on, which revealed eerie, consistent memories of an alien abduction. On December 1st, 1987, a retired police officer known only as Spencer to the press was out for a walk in Ilkley Moor in England. While climbing a small hill, he saw a strange figure ahead of him, about 4 feet tall, dark green, with an oversized head and long, thin arms. The figure made a gesture that seemed to warn Spencer to stay back, but instead he took out his camera and he snapped a photo. The creature then ran off. Spencer followed but lost track of it in the fog. That's when Spencer saw a craft rise from the moor. He said it had 2 saucer-shaped parts stacked on top of each other, and that it hummed loudly as it disappeared into the sky. At this point, Spencer decided that his walk was over, and he started heading to town, only to realize he was hours later than he should have been. His compass was also pointing in the wrong direction. In the days that followed, Spencer reached out to UFO researchers Jenny Randles and Peter Howe. The photograph Spencer took was examined by experts, and while it couldn't be proven to be fake, it was also too grainy for any real conclusion either. According to UFOologist Nick Redfern, Spencer was also visited by 2 men in black who apparently intimidated him into staying silent. On the night of August 21st, 1955, in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, a bizarre incident took place that has gone down as one of the craziest cryptid reports of all time, at least that I've read about. A group of 12 people who'd been staying at their small family farm rushed to the local police station saying that they had been under attack by small, alien-looking creatures. They claimed these creatures were about 3 to 4 feet tall and were peeking into their farmhouse windows and doorways, and that they'd been fighting them off for hours. And this all happened after they saw some weird light descend into the trees by the farmhouse. So 2 adults, Elmer Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor, described seeing short, dark figures popping up and even tried to hold them off with gunfire. Soon police, state troopers, and military personnel from nearby Fort Campbell showed up to investigate. What they found were signs of gunfire and holes in the farmhouse's windows and door screens, but no sign of any creatures. The following day, the family packed up and they left the farmhouse. The mysterious creatures were never seen again. November of 1979, Robert Taylor, a forestry worker from Scotland, had an encounter that left him badly shaken and injured. Taylor had gone for a walk near Dutchmont Law, wooden area in Livingston, when he'd claimed to see a strange flying dome. He described the object as a large metallic sphere about 7 yards in diameter, hovering above the ground. It also had a rough sandpaper-like texture and small propellers on its rim. According to Taylor, the thing sprouted smaller spheres, which he compared to sea mines, that started dragging him toward the larger object. Then everything went black. When he came to, the strange craft and smaller objects were gone. Taylor tried to start his truck, but it wasn't working, so he walked home. When he got home, his wife was in shock. Taylor was disheveled, his clothes were torn, and he had grazes on his chin and thighs. The police were called, and after examining the site, they found odd marks in the ground, which Taylor said were caused by these strange objects. Finally, in November of 1980, Alan Godfrey, a police constable in West Yorkshire, was responding to reports of cattle roaming a council estate when he saw this strange diamond-shaped light hovering above the road. It was about 20 feet high and 14 feet wide, rotating slowly. He tried to radio for backup, but his equipment suddenly wasn't working. And then, just like that, the object vanished. Godfrey found himself 30 yards down the road. He was unable to explain where the last 30 minutes had gone. He also had a split boot and a strange red mark on his foot. Later, under hypnosis, Godfrey recalled being hit by a beam of light, causing him to lose consciousness. He remembered then waking up inside a room being examined by small, non-human beings and a more humanoid figure. Godfrey would later say it was possible the whole thing was a dream, but at the time, he felt very strongly that what he experienced was real. He also thought the experience led to his early retirement from the police force.